I'm Sabrina, 32 female. I work as an archivist, a profession that suits my personality perfectly. My life is a quiet collection of carefully preserved histories, of stories cataloged and cross-referenced until they form a coherent, verifiable truth. I live alone in a small but meticulously organized apartment, surrounded by books and the gentle quiet that I've come to prefer over the loud, messy chaos of human interaction. My job is to make sense of the past, to find the narrative thread in a tangle of documents, photographs, and artifacts. It's ironic, then, that for most of my life, I've been unable to do the same for my own history, which always felt like a story with crucial pages torn out. My family has always been a puzzle I couldn't solve, or perhaps when I was too afraid to. At the center of it is my mother, Pamela, a woman who could sell a house with a cracked foundation by simply calling the cracks character lines. She is charming, charismatic, and has a smile that could disarm a bomb, but behind that polished facade is a will of iron and a capacity for cruelty that she reserves for special occasions, and it often seemed for me. Then there's my older brother, Arthur. He is my mother's golden child, the sun around which our family's solar system has always revolved. He's a financial advisor, successful and confident, and he long ago learned that the path of least resistance was to orbit our mother perfectly, reflecting her light and never, ever questioning her gravity. We were never close. Our relationship was less sibling rivalry and more like two employees competing for the approval of a capricious CEO. One of us was always destined to be vice president, the other perpetually stuck in the mailroom. For as long as I can remember, I have been the outlier, the quiet, bookish daughter who didn't fit into the glossy family portrait my mother was so desperate to paint. I was the inconvenient truth in her perfectly curated life, and this Christmas, she finally decided to erase me from the picture altogether. This story is about how my family forgot to tell me they had changed the time for Christmas dinner, leaving me to show up to a dark, empty house. It's about how the cold of that porch was nothing compared to the chill I felt when I learned it wasn't a mistake, but a deliberate, calculated act of exclusion orchestrated by my own mother. But more than that, it's about how I, the family archivist, finally decided to unearth the truth and present them with a history they could no longer deny. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The lead up to Christmas always began with a phone call from my mother in late October. It was less a conversation and more a series of directives disguised as cheerful planning. This year was no different. "Sabrina, darling," she'd chirped, her voice oozing the practiced warmth of a seasoned real estate agent closing a deal. "We're doing Christmas at our house this year, 6 o'clock sharp on the 25th. Arthur is bringing a honey-glazed ham, and Susan is handling the appetizers. I'll need you to bring your famous salted caramel apple pie. Everyone just adores it." I murmured my agreement, pen already hovering over the calendar on my desk. My pie was the only contribution of mine that was ever adored. Everything else about me was tolerated at best. I was the quiet one, the one who preferred reading in a corner to participating in the loud, performative debates about politics or my cousin Susan's latest freelance design project. My job as an archivist was a source of constant, gentle mockery. Still playing with dusty old papers. Arthur would ask with a condescending chuckle, while my mother would sigh dramatically and say, "We had so hoped you'd do something more social." Despite this, I held onto a sliver of hope each year. A foolish, stubborn hope that this would be the year things would be different. This would be the year my mother would look at me with genuine affection, the year my brother would ask about my work with sincere interest, the year I would feel like I truly belonged. So, I threw myself into the preparations with the same meticulous dedication I applied to my work. I wasn't just baking a pie, I was crafting a peace offering. I spent an entire afternoon perfecting the crust, sourcing the best organic apples from the farmer's market, and slow-cooking the caramel until it was the exact shade of amber. I also spent weeks searching for the perfect gifts. For my mother, a first-edition copy of a book by her favorite author, sourced through a network of rare book dealers. For Arthur, a set of vintage cufflinks I found at an estate sale, shaped like tiny bulls and bears. For my Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister and my only real ally, a beautiful wool scarf in her favorite SH. A day of blue. Margaret was a librarian, and we shared a quiet understanding, a bond forged over a mutual love for the hushed, sacred spaces of libraries and archives. She was the only one who saw me, and her presence was the one thing I genuinely looked forward to. In the weeks before Christmas, the family group chat was a flurry of activity. Susan posted pictures of her proposed table settings. Arthur boasted about the expensive wine he was bringing. My mother sent out reminders, her messages always punctuated with an excessive number of festive emojis that felt jarringly insincere. I scrolled through them, a silent observer. I had confirmed my attendance and my pie contribution in a single, polite message that was quickly buried under an avalanche of replies. One evening, about a week before Christmas, I noticed a brief, strange exchange. Susan, just confirming the new plan for the 25th. So excited, winking face. Pamela, yes, it will be so much better this way. Let's not clog the main chat. I've messaged you all privately. I stared at my phone. I hadn't received a private message. A small, cold knot formed in my stomach, a familiar feeling I'd learned to ignore over the years. It was probably just a minor detail, I told myself. Maybe they were planning a surprise for Grandpa. I pushed the thought away, labeling it as my own insecurity. My mother knew I was coming at 6. She had told me so herself. I was the one bringing the dessert. They couldn't have Christmas dinner without the dessert, could they? Christmas morning arrived, a blanket of fresh snow covering the world outside my window. I spent the morning listening to classical music and carefully packing my gifts into festive bags. The pie sat cooling on the counter, its aroma filling my small apartment with a scent of cinnamon and false hope. I received a single text from Aunt Margaret, "Merry Christmas, dear. Can't wait to see you later." That simple message was enough to dissolve the last of my anxieties. Margaret knew. It was all fine. At 4:30, I started getting ready. I put on a dark green velvet dress, one I'd bought specifically for the occasion, hoping it would look festive and elegant. I did my hair, put on a little makeup, and felt a flicker of something resembling excitement. I pictured myself walking in, the warmth of the house enveloping me, the scent of pine and roasting ham filling the air. I imagined my mother's surprised but pleased expression when she saw the rare book, Arthur's grudgingly impressed nod at the cufflinks. I imagined a peaceful evening, a normal Christmas. As I carefully placed the pie into a carrier and gathered the gift bags, I looked around my quiet apartment. Everything was in its place, ordered and calm. I was about to step out of my sanctuary and into the storm. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my keys, locked the door behind me, and walked out into the cold, completely oblivious to the fact that the storm had already passed, and I was the only one left standing in the wreckage. The drive to my parents' house was 25 minutes, a journey I knew by heart. The roads were quiet, most people already tucked away in their homes, celebrating with their loved ones. Christmas carols played softly on the radio, and the festive lights adorning the houses I passed cast a warm, cheerful glow on the snow-covered lawns. I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The anxiety that had been a low hum in the back of my mind for weeks had finally subsided. I was on my way. I was going to be part of the celebration. I turned onto my parents' street, a familiar lane lined with mature oak trees, their bare branches stark against the darkening sky. Their house was at the very end, a large colonial that my mother always kept immaculately decorated for every season. As I got closer, however, the cold knot in my stomach from the week before began to reform, tighter and colder this time. The house was dark. Not just dim, but completely, unnervingly dark. All the other houses on the street were ablaze with light, their windows framing scenes of families gathered around trees and dinner tables. My parents' house, however, was a black hole on a street of twinkling stars. Not a single Christmas light was on. No welcoming glow from the porch lamp. Nothing. My heart began to beat a little faster. Maybe there was a power outage, but the neighboring houses were fine. I pulled into the long driveway and my headlights swept across the front of the house, confirming what I already knew. The driveway was empty, completely empty. Arthur's luxury sedan wasn't there. Susan's trendy compact SUV was missing. Even my parents' own car was gone. There was only my small sedan, its engine humming in the profound silence. I turned off the car, and the silence became absolute. For a few moments, I just sat there, staring at the dark windows of the house where I grew up. It looked abandoned, like a place full of ghosts. The pie carrier on the passenger seat seemed to mock me with its festive red ribbon. The beautifully wrapped gifts in the back seat felt like props for a play that had been canceled without anyone telling the lead actor. Denial is a powerful thing. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe they'd all gone to a last-minute Christmas Eve service that had run late. Maybe there was a family emergency. Maybe they had all decided to go out to see a movie, and my mother, in her usual scattered way, had forgotten to call me. My mind scrambled for any possibility, any reason that wasn't the one looming in the shadows of my consciousness. They weren't here because they didn't want me to be here. Finally, I got out of the car. The cold was immediate and sharp, biting at my exposed skin. I wasn't wearing a heavy coat, just a thin wool one over my velvet dress, foolishly assuming I'd be going from a warm car to a warm house. I walked up the stone pathway, my heels crunching on a thin layer of icy snow. The porch was just as dark and unwelcoming as the rest of the house. The festive wreath on the door, with its jaunty red bow, looked like a cruel joke. I rang the doorbell. The chime echoed strangely, too loud in the dead silence. I waited, listening, hoping to hear the sound of footsteps, a voice calling out, "Just a minute." Nothing. I rang it again, holding the button down longer this time. Still nothing. I pressed my face against the cold glass of the living room window. Inside, it was pitch black. I could just make out the faint silhouette of the Christmas tree, unlit, a sad, lonely shape in the darkness. Panic began to mix with a rising tide of humiliation. I knocked, my fist making a hollow sound against the thick wood of the door. "Mom, Dad," I called out, my voice sounding small and thin in the vast emptiness. "Arthur, is anyone home?" The only answer was the whisper of the wind through the bare trees. I stepped back, pulling my phone from my purse. My fingers were stiff and numb from the cold. I checked the family group chat again. Nothing new. I checked my private messages. Nothing. I looked at the original invitation from my mother, a text from 2 months ago. "Christmas at our place, deck 25th at 6 p.m. I had read it correctly. I wasn't crazy. I stood on that cold porch for what felt like an eternity, the gift bags hanging heavy from my hands, the smell of my carefully baked pie wafting from the car. I felt a profound sense of foolishness, of shame so intense it was almost nauseating. I had dressed up. I had baked. I had spent weeks picking out thoughtful gifts. I had allowed myself to hope. And for what? To stand alone in the dark on my parents' porch on Christmas Day, like a stranger or a solicitor. The illusion of a family Christmas hadn't just cracked. It had shattered into a million tiny pieces, and I was left standing in the shards. The silence of the empty house was the loudest rejection I had ever heard. The numbness in my fingers had begun to spread through my entire body. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen on the porch, staring at the reflection of a pathetic, overdressed woman in the dark glass of the front door. Humiliation was a heavy cloak, and I was drowning in it. My first instinct was to flee, to drive home, crawl into bed, and pretend this night had never happened. I was turning to leave, to retreat back to the safety of my quiet, predictable life, when a faint vibration came from my pocket. My phone lit up, a small beacon in the oppressive darkness. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize, but the preview on the screen made my blood run cold. It was a picture. A group of people, my family, were gathered around a beautifully set dinner table, raising their glasses in a toast. In the center, smiling broadly, were my mother and Arthur. Susan was there, and other aunts, uncles, and cousins. They were all there, laughing, celebrating. And in the corner of the photo, a timestamp, 3:15 p.m. The message underneath was from my cousin Susan. "Oops, wrong number, sorry." It wasn't a mistake. It was a taunt. A deliberate, cruel twist of the knife she had to know was already in my back. Susan had always been my mother's lieutenant, eager to please and quick to participate in the subtle games of exclusion. Sending that photo was an act of malice disguised as an accident. They weren't at my parents' house. They were somewhere else. And their Christmas dinner had happened hours ago. Just as the hot, angry tears I'd been fighting back began to well in my eyes, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my Aunt Margaret calling. Her name on the screen was both a relief and a source of dread. She was my only ally, but she was also in that picture. She was with them. I swiped to answer, my voice barely a whisper. Hello. Sabrina, oh, thank God, I've been trying you. Where are you? Are you okay? Her voice was rushed, laced with genuine panic. I could hear the loud chatter and laughter of a party in the background, the party I was supposed to be at. I'm at Mom and Dad's house, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. It's empty, the house is dark. There was a pause on the other end, and the background noise seemed to fade as if she had moved to a quieter room. Oh, Sabrina. Oh, no, 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 no. Her voice was filled with a pained sort of pity that made me feel even worse. The dinner isn't there. It's at Susan's house. We ate hours ago. I know, I said, my voice cracking. Susan made sure I knew. Another pause, longer this time. She sent you a photo, didn't she? Margaret sighed, a heavy, weary sound. I saw her do it. She had this awful little smirk on her face. I knew it was for you. Why wasn't I told? I asked, the question hanging in the cold air between us. It was the only question that mattered. Margaret, why did no one tell me the time and place were changed? I could hear her take a shaky breath. This was it. The moment of truth. She could lie, she could make an excuse, she could try to smooth it over the way my family always did. But Margaret, for all her quiet passivity over the years, was a librarian. She valued facts. I asked her, Margaret said, her voice dropping so low I could barely hear her. Sabrina, I swear to you, I asked Pamela 2 weeks ago if she had told you about the change of plans. We all moved it to Susan's at 2 o'clock because the oven at your mom's is on the fritz. At least, that was the official reason. And what did she say? I pressed, my heart pounding in my chest, bracing for the impact of the words I knew were coming. She looked me right in the eye and said, Of course, I told her, it's all handled. She said you might be a little late because of work, but that you knew. Margaret's voice broke with guilt and anger. I didn't think to question it. I should have called you myself. I am so sorry. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was a cold, calculated lie. My own mother had deliberately and methodically excluded me from our family's Christmas celebration. She had looked her own sister in the eye and lied to ensure my humiliation was complete. There's more, Margaret said, her voice tight with fury. Just before dinner, I asked where you were. Pamela just waved her hand dismissively and said you probably got caught up in one of your dusty books and forgot. Then Arthur laughed and said you probably preferred it that way anyway. Later, I cornered Pamela in the kitchen. I told her you weren't answering your phone and I was worried. And that's when she told me the truth. I held my breath. She told me she didn't want the day ruined by your moods, Margaret recounted, her words dripping with disgust. She said you always cast a dark cloud over the festivities and that she just wanted one perfect, happy Christmas without you there to bring everyone down. And then she told me that she had told everyone else not to contact you about the change. She made them all promise. The line went silent. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. The cold from the porch had seeped into my bones, into my soul. It was a deep, internal chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the absolute certainty of being completely and utterly unloved by the one person who was supposed to love you unconditionally. My mother. She hadn't forgotten me. She had erased me, and she had made the rest of our family her accomplices. Sabrina, are you still there? Margaret's voice was a distant echo. I'm here, I finally managed to say. Thank you for telling me, Margaret. Thank you for the truth. I ended the call before she could say anything else. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want her apologies. All I wanted was the truth, and now I had it. It was ugly, it was painful, but it was real. And in its own strange way, it was liberating. The hope I had carried for so many years was finally, irrevocably extinguished. And in its place, something new and hard and cold began to form: resolve. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the roads or the traffic lights. I remember the weight of the uneaten pie on the passenger seat and the glitter of the wrapping paper on the gifts in the back. When I walked into my apartment, the warmth and quiet that usually comforted me felt suffocating. I dropped the gifts by the door, put the pie on the kitchen counter, and stood in the middle of my living room, the green velvet dress feeling like a costume for a role I had failed to play. The initial shock and pain began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear anger unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't a hot, explosive rage. It was a quiet, methodical fury. The fury of an archivist who has just discovered that a crucial historical record has been deliberately falsified. My mother hadn't just excluded me from one Christmas dinner. She had, as Aunt Margaret quoted, accused me of casting a dark cloud. She had been curating a false narrative about me for years, painting me as a morose, antisocial killjoy to justify her own cruelty. And as I stood there, the archivist in me took over. My job was to preserve truth, to cut through bias and myth to find the verifiable facts. For my entire life, I had accepted my family's narrative about me, that I was too sensitive, too quiet, not a team player. Now, I was going to investigate my own history with the same dispassionate rigor I applied to my work. I was going to unearth the truth of my own past. My personal archives were as meticulously organized as my professional ones. I had boxes of old journals, photo albums, and neatly labeled files of important documents and correspondence. I pulled them out, spreading them across my living room floor. It was time to build a case. I started with the recent past, printing out the text exchange from the family group chat, Susan's cruel oops photo, and a log of my call with Margaret. I wrote down her words verbatim, noting the date and time. This was Exhibit A. Then I started digging deeper. I went back year by year, cross-referencing my journals with photo albums and old emails I'd saved on a hard drive. A pattern began to emerge, so clear and consistent it was sickening. It was a history of 1,000 tiny cuts, a lifetime of subtle but deliberate exclusion. I found a journal entry from my 21st birthday. I had written about being heartbroken because my family had forgotten my birthday. I'd spent the whole day waiting for a call that never came. A week later, my mother had called, full of breezy apologies, claiming they'd celebrated for me, but had been so busy they'd simply forgotten to include me. But in a box of old photos, I found a picture from that very day. My whole family, including aunts, uncles, and cousins, was at a fancy restaurant. Arthur was holding a small cake with a single candle. At the bottom of the photo, in my mother's elegant script, was written, "Arthur's MBA celebration, so proud." They hadn't forgotten my birthday. They had prioritized his achievement and then lied to cover it up. I kept digging. I found an email chain from a family vacation to the beach when I was in high school. My mother had told me the rental house was full and that I would have to stay home. "It's just a boring trip for the adults, sweetie," she had said. "You'd be much happier at home with your books." I had believed her, but the emails, which she had accidentally copied me on, told a different story. The rental house had an extra bedroom. Susan, my cousin, had asked if her friend could come. My mother had replied, "Of course, the more the merrier, we have plenty of room." They had space for a near stranger, but not for me. The evidence piled up. The time I wasn't invited to my own cousin's engagement party because my mother lost the invitation. The school plays and award ceremonies she never attended, always with a last-minute, unverifiable excuse. The way she would praise Arthur's mediocre grades while dismissing my academic scholarships as niche interests. I called Aunt Margaret again the next day. She was subdued, her guilt still palpable. "I'm glad you called," she said. "I can't stop thinking about it, about all of it." "Margaret," I said, my voice steady, "I need you to be honest with me. This isn't the first time, is it?" She was silent for a long time. "No, Sabrina," she finally admitted, her voice heavy with regret. "It's not. Pamela, she's always been competitive, even with her own children. When you and Arthur were little, your father doted on you. You were quiet and thoughtful, just like him. Arthur was more like Pamela, loud and demanding. I think a part of her has always resented that bond you had with your dad. After he passed, it just got worse. She needed to be the center of everyone's world, and you were a reminder of a time when she wasn't. Her words were the final piece of the puzzle. It wasn't about me being a dark cloud. It was about her own deep-seated insecurities and jealousies. I wasn't the problem. I was the scapegoat. For 2 days, I barely slept. I worked like I was on a deadline for the most important project of my life. I scanned photos, printed emails, and transcribed journal entries. I laid out a timeline of my life, not the one I remembered through the fog of gaslighting and self-doubt, but the one documented in cold, hard facts. Each instance of exclusion, each lie, each subtle act of sabotage was recorded, dated, and cross-referenced. By the end of the second day, my living room floor looked like a conspiracy theorist's office. But it wasn't a theory. It was the truth. It was a comprehensive archive of deceit, a testament to a lifetime of being quietly, methodically pushed to the margins of my own family. And as I looked at the mountain of evidence, the anger and pain began to coalesce into a single, sharp point of clarity. I was an archivist, and an archivist's job is not just to preserve history, but to present it. The plan came to me not in a flash of anger, but in a moment of quiet, crystalline clarity. I was sitting amidst the carefully organized chaos of my living room floor, surrounded by the documented evidence of my own erasure. For years, my family, led by my mother, had been the sole authors of our shared history, a history that was a work of fiction. My revenge, I decided, would not be an angry outburst or a dramatic confrontation. It would be a correction, a historical addendum. My mother was a master of appearances, obsessed with maintaining the glossy facade of a perfect family. I would simply present her with the unvarnished truth, in a format she couldn't ignore. My profession had given me a unique set of skills. I knew how to handle delicate documents, how to research, and most importantly, how to curate information to tell a powerful, undeniable story. I decided to create a gift, a beautifully crafted, professionally bound book, something that on the surface would look like a sentimental family photo album. But inside, it would be my archive of deceit. I would call it the family archive, a record of omissions and corrections. I spent the next few days in a state of focused, almost feverish activity. I went to a specialty store and bought several high-quality, leather-bound scrapbook albums, the kind with archival-safe pages. I used the professional-grade scanner and printer at my office after hours, meticulously digitizing the photos, emails, and journal pages I had collected. My design was simple but devastatingly effective. Each 2-page spread would represent a specific event. On the right-hand page, I would place a photograph of the official memory, a smiling family picture from a holiday, a birthday, or a vacation. On the left-hand page, I would present the evidence of my exclusion from that same event. The contrast would be stark, undeniable. The first spread was for Arthur's 16th birthday party. On the right, a glossy photo of him surrounded by friends and family, grinning as he blew out the candles on a large cake. On the left, a high-resolution scan of the page from my own 13-year-old diary. My loopy teenage handwriting was full of heartbreak. Mom said Arthur's party was canceled because of the storm. I'm so bummed. I really wanted to go. Spent the whole day in my room. Beneath it, I placed a printed copy of the weather report from that day. Clear skies and mild temperatures. Another spread was dedicated to the beach vacation. On the right, a cheerful group photo of my family on the sand, squinting in the sun. On the left, a printout of the email from my mother telling Susan's friend she was welcome, placed directly beside a scan of my perfect attendance certificate from school for that same week. I worked chronologically, building the narrative brick by brick. The forgotten birthdays, the lost invitations, the solo holidays. Each page was a quiet indictment, a factual refutation of the family myth. The book was a silent testament to a truth that had been whispered but never spoken. The final section of the book was dedicated to the Christmas that had just passed. This was the crescendo, the event that had finally shattered my lifelong denial. On the right-hand page, I placed the picture Susan had sent me, the one of my family toasting at the dinner table. It was a picture of perfect, happy unity. On the left, I created a chilling triptych. First, a photo I had taken myself while standing on the cold porch, a dark, blurry shot of the empty house, reflecting my own ghostly image in the window. Second, a screenshot of the text from my mother, 2 months prior, confirming the dinner was at her house at 6 p.m. And third, a simple, typed transcript of my conversation with Aunt Margaret, ending with the devastating quote. She said she didn't want the day ruined by your moods, and she made everyone promise not to tell you. I made 4 copies of the book, one for my mother, Pamela, one for my brother, Arthur, her loyal second-in-command, one for my cousin, Susan, the eager accomplice, and one for me. I didn't make one for Aunt Margaret. She didn't need a record of the truth she had helped me uncover. The timing of the gift was crucial. A dramatic confrontation at Christmas would have been playing into their narrative of me being a moody drama creator. I needed a different stage. The next designated family gathering was New Year's Day Brunch, an annual event hosted by my mother, designed to start the year off with a performance of familial harmony. It was the perfect venue. It was her stage, her production. I would simply be adding a new scene to the play, one she hadn't written. On New Year's Eve, I finished the last book. I wrapped each one in simple, elegant silver paper with a plain white gift tag bearing a single name. They looked beautiful, innocuous, like gifts of love and memory. But they were not gifts. They were judgments. They were the receipts for a lifetime of emotional debt, and I was finally ready to deliver the invoice. As the clock struck midnight, I didn't toast to a new year of hope with my family. I toasted to the truth. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this would be the last New Year I ever spent with them. New Year's Day dawned bright and cold. I dressed carefully, not in velvet or anything that looked like I was trying too hard, but in a simple cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. I wanted to look calm, composed, and unassailable. I was not the emotional, moody girl my mother described. I was a professional presenting her findings. I gathered the 3 silver-wrapped books, their weight in my bag feeling both heavy and liberating. When I arrived at my mother's house, the scene was exactly as I'd pictured. The brunch was in full swing, a symphony of polite chatter, clinking mimosa glasses, and smooth jazz playing softly in the background. My mother, Pamela, was in her element, flitting between guests with a plate of pastries, her smile bright and flawlessly artificial. My brother, Arthur, was holding court by the fireplace, talking loudly about the stock market, while Susan was showing photos on her phone to a group of aunts. My entrance caused a small, almost imperceptible ripple in the room. Conversations faltered for a half-second. My mother's smile tightened just a fraction. This was the first time they had seen me since their mistake on Christmas Day. I had ignored all their calls and texts, the flurry of messages that had come the day after Christmas, starting with breezy, "Hope you had a good Christmas," and morphing into feigned concern, "Sabrina, are you okay? We were so worried when you didn't show up." I had refused to engage, giving them no emotional ammunition to use against me. "Sabrina, darling," my mother exclaimed, rushing over to envelop me in a stiff, air-kiss embrace that smelled of expensive perfume and deceit. "We were so worried about you. What on earth happened on Christmas?" "I'm fine, Mother," I said, my voice even and calm. "There was just a misunderstanding about the time and place." Her relief was palpable. She thought I had bought the lie, or at least was willing to pretend I had for the sake of peace. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, patting my arm. "It was all so last minute, the oven breaking down. Arthur was supposed to call you." "Brothers," she laughed, a tinkling sound that didn't. To reach her eyes, Arthur, from across the room, gave a noncommittal shrug. I let them play out their little performance. I got a glass of orange juice, exchanged pleasantries with a few distant relatives, and waited. I waited until everyone was seated, plates full of food, the hum of conversation at its peak. This was the moment. I stood up, clearing my throat softly. The room quieted, turning to look at me. It was rare for me to command attention, and the novelty of it silenced them. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I began, my voice clear and steady. "I know I missed the gift exchange on Christmas, so I brought a few late presents with me." I walked over to my bag and pulled out the 3 silver packages. I saw a flicker of confusion on my mother's face. I walked first to her, placing the heavy, rectangular gift in her hands. "For you, Mom." Then I went to my brother, Arthur, and finally to my cousin, Susan. "How lovely, darling," my mother said, already starting to tear at the paper. "What a surprise." They opened their gifts simultaneously. I watched their faces, cataloging every microexpression, the way an archivist notes the condition of a delicate manuscript. First, there was confusion as they saw the elegant, leather-bound book. Then, a flicker of pleasure. They thought it was a sentimental album. Pamela opened hers first. Her smile froze on her face as she saw the title page, "The Family Archive," a record of omissions and corrections. She turned the first page, the one with Arthur's 16th birthday party juxtaposed with my diary entry. The color drained from her face. Arthur's reaction was slower, then all at once. He flipped through a few pages, his confident posture collapsing inward as he saw the evidence of his own complicity. He saw the beach vacation emails, the dismissive texts about me. He slammed the book shut, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Susan, however, was the most transparent. She turned directly to the last section, the part about this Christmas. She saw the photo she had sent me. She saw the picture of the dark house. She saw the transcript of what my mother had done. A strangled little gasp escaped her lips, and she looked at my mother with wide, panicked eyes, as if to say, she knows everything. The room had fallen into a dead silence. Everyone was watching the 3 of them, watching this silent, incomprehensible drama unfold. "What is this, Sabrina?" my mother finally hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "What is the meaning of this sick joke?" "It's not a joke," I replied, my voice still perfectly calm. "It's a historical correction. I'm an archivist, after all. My job is to preserve the truth, and I realized our family's official history had some significant errors and omissions. I just took the liberty of compiling an addendum." I looked from her to my brother. "The Christmas dinner that served revenge wasn't this one," I said softly, answering the unspoken question in their eyes. "It was the one you served me on the 25th. Cold, empty, and full of lies. This," I said, gesturing to the books, "is just the dessert. The truth served cold." Pamela stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her face was a mask of fury. "You have always been a bitter, ungrateful child," she snarled. "Always trying to ruin everything." "No," I said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I have always been your daughter, and you have always been a liar. The only difference is that now, the evidence is collated, cited, and published." I picked up my purse, my movements slow and deliberate. I didn't need to say another word. The books would do the talking for me for years to come. I walked towards the door, the eyes of my entire family following me. As I reached it, I turned back for one final look. My mother stood there, trembling with rage, holding the truth in her hands and hating me for it. Arthur wouldn't meet my eyes. And in the corner, Aunt Margaret was looking at me, her expression not one of shock, but of quiet, profound pride. I gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, and walked out the door, leaving the echo of my truth to shatter their perfect, silent brunch. The moment I closed the front door of my mother's house behind me, it was like stepping out of a vacuum into the fresh, cold air. The cacophony I had left behind, the shouting that I could hear erupting even through the thick wood of the door, faded into a distant, irrelevant noise. I didn't run to my car. I walked, each step feeling lighter than the last. The heavy burden of seeking their approval, a weight I had carried on my shoulders for 32 years, had been set down. I had not destroyed my family. I had simply held up a mirror to what it had always been. My phone started buzzing before I had even pulled out of their driveway. It was Arthur. I declined the call. A text immediately followed. "You have no idea what you've just done." I read it, felt nothing, and then blocked his number. Knee. XD came Susan, a string of panicked question marks. Blocked. Then, an unknown number, which I knew would be my mother using someone else's phone. Blocked. I drove home in a state of serene silence, the only sound the hum of the engine. The days that followed were a strange mix of quiet and chaos. The quiet was in my apartment, where I was finally, truly alone, unburdened by the anticipation of a command performance or the dread of a passive-aggressive text. The chaos was external, a storm raging at the walls of my fortress. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me on social media, some calling me cruel and vindictive, others tentatively asking if what my album showed was true. They were the flying monkeys, dispatched by my mother to attack or gather information. I ignored them all, deleting requests and blocking accounts without a second thought. I was archiving my life in real time, curating my own peace by excising the sources of its disruption. The one call I did answer came 2 days later, from Aunt Margaret. "I just wanted to see how you are," she said, her voice soft. "I'm okay, Margaret. I think I'm better than okay," I replied, and the surprising thing was I meant it. "How was the fallout?" She let out a long, weary sigh. "Biblical. Pamela is telling everyone you've had a nervous breakdown and fabricated the entire thing. But the book, Sabrina, the book is undeniable. Arthur is furious, but not at you. I think, for the first time, he's furious at her. He sees how she manipulated him his entire life. Susan is a wreck, crying and apologizing to anyone who will listen." "It's not my problem anymore," I said. It was a simple statement of fact. "No," Margaret agreed. "It's not. Sabrina, what you did was the bravest thing I have ever seen. You stood up to a bully that has terrorized this family for decades, armed with nothing but the truth." She paused. "My only regret is that I stood by and let it happen for so long. I am so sorry for my part in it." "You were the one who told me the final truth," I reminded her. "That's all that matters to me. Thank you." That conversation was a beginning. In the weeks and months that followed, Margaret and I started to build a real relationship, one based not on whispered secrets at the edge of family gatherings, but on mutual respect and a shared love for quiet afternoons spent in bookstores and museums. She became more than an aunt. She became a friend. The rest of the family system, now broken, tried to recalibrate. I heard through the grapevine that Arthur had a massive fight with our mother and was now keeping his distance. Susan, stripped of her position as the popular insider, had apparently retreated from family functions. The perfect family portrait was shattered, and my mother was left alone in the ruins, still proclaiming her innocence to an ever-dwindling audience. My life, in contrast, began to expand. Without the constant, draining effort of trying to win an unwinnable game, I had so much more energy. I poured it into my work, earning a promotion. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected, realizing with a pang of guilt that I had often been too consumed by family drama to be a good friend. They welcomed me back with open arms, no questions asked. My chosen family began to take shape. It was a small, quiet group, a couple of friends from college, a coworker who shared my dry sense of humor, and Margaret. We celebrated birthdays with quiet dinners, not lavish parties. We had holidays that were peaceful and genuine, not performative and stressful. My apartment, once a sanctuary from my family, became a place of warmth and welcome for people who genuinely cared about me. One snowy evening in March, about 3 months after that New Year's Day, I was hosting a small dinner party. Margaret was helping me in the kitchen, and my friends were laughing in the living room. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air. I looked around at the scene, the easy smiles, the genuine warmth, the comfortable silence, and a profound sense of peace washed over me. This was family. It wasn't something you were born into by accident of biology, but something you built, carefully and deliberately, with pillars of trust, respect, and unconditional love. My mother had tried to erase me from her story. But in doing so, she had given me the greatest gift of all, the freedom to write my own. And in this new book, my book, every page was filled with truth, and every chapter ended with peace.